Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome. I'm Judy Gruen, author of the Book of Jeremiah, and welcome to the January Literary Modiin author event. This is our first event of 2025. Today, on day 471, it's been a very, very emotional day here in Israel. About 2.5 hours ago, we received the very welcome news that three of our beloved hostages, Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher, and Romy Gonen, were handed over to the Red Cross and then to the IDF, and they are now reunited with their mothers, and God willing, soon will be with the rest of their families. So thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight, taking a break from the news. We know we have several months, several weeks, if not months, of very fraught time here. And I know you all join with me in the fervent hope that we will soon see all of our hostages home. At the end of the session, I will say a few more words about that. But now I'd like to switch gears to our main events, just something also joyful, and that is the release of new Jewish books in the world. For those of you who are new here, Literary Modiin got started about 5.5 years ago in my city of Modiin. It was started as an in-person event, and then with the pandemic, we switched to a virtual event mostly, and it's grown into a monthly event with authors and attendees from all over the world. And this is our 57th event. So welcome. We have a large audience, so everybody's going to be on mute. The format of today's event is that each author speaks for about 15 minutes, and then we open it up to questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat box or any comments along the way. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can just send a private note in the chat to me. And with that introduction, I will now introduce our first author. Galina Vromen began writing fiction after more than 20 years as an international journalist in Israel, England, the Netherlands, France, and Mexico. After a career with Reuters, she moved to the nonprofit sector as a director at the Harold Greenspoon Foundation. Galina launched and directed 2 reading readiness programs in Israel, Sifriyat Pajama, which is the Hebrew version of the PJ Library program, and Maktabat al-Fanus in Arabic. Her stories have been performed on NPR's Selected Shorts program and appeared in a variety of literary magazines. Galina and her husband divide their time between Israel and Massachusetts. Hill of Secrets is her first novel, and I'll just say that Galina and I were in a writing group together for a time before I dropped out. So I've had the privilege of seeing some of these chapters in their early stages, and I was so excited when I saw that your book was being published. So, Galina, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, Julie, for having me. And yes, as you know, I'm trying to get you to come back to the writers group because your critique was always excellent. And yes, the book has gone through many, many drafts. So this is the book, Hill of Secrets. It is a historic novel based in Los Alamos, New Mexico, at the time that the atomic bomb was being created there. And for those of you who saw the movie Oppenheimer, it really deals with a lot of things that the movie Oppenheimer doesn't, which is about domestic life there, what it was like for the families who were forced to live there. There were about 6,000 people in Los Alamos by the end of World War II. 2/3 of them were families. And I was very intrigued by the whole idea. I've been very intrigued by the idea of secrecy and secrecy in families and secrecy in general. And and to put the whole issue of family secrets and personal secrets in the context and put it in one of the most secret places of the 20th century was something that I thought to put it in that background would make it more interesting. So a lot of people tell me, well, it's not really about Los Alamos, it's really about these families, and it's both. But it could have been in another place. I became intrigued. I've always been very interested and concerned about nuclear proliferation. It's very difficult to care about Israel and not be concerned about that. So I've been reading about that for as far back as I remember myself. Also, I've spent some time in kibbutz or moshav shitufi, and there are certain aspects as I began to research the book that really there's something about this collective of living together and all the Peyton Placey kind of things that go on in places like that that really come out in the book, and I think are have that in common. That said, Los Alamos was secret. It didn't exist as far as the world was concerned. There was censorship. People couldn't leave. And most of all was that by and large, people did not know what was going on there. The families did not know why they were there. They didn't know how long they were going to be there. And they had to make a life. It was kind of like, suck it up and make a life for yourself. And so that's the part that the book really focuses on. I have had personally an incredible publishing experience. It's published by Lake Union. I have gotten I just hit 6,500 ratings on Amazon, which is phenomenal for a debut book. I'm happy to say that more than 80% of them are 4 and 5 stars. So, that speaks that one couldn't help wish for more. Um, and the book does feature three Jewish characters. The physicist Kurt Kopel, who's a German refugee who comes with his wife Sarah, who is very concerned about what's happening with her family back in Germany, and Gertie, who is their teenage daughter, um, who's trying to become as American as possible, who really wants to forget the past, who does all the things that teenagers want in their lives, romance, and trying to figure out what grown-ups are up to. She's the only person in the book that does not have a secret. Everybody else has a secret, either from themselves, from each other, and so forth. Um, so that's the basics of the book. And I think I will at this point read a bit of an excerpt. It's pretty customary, and I usually do a reading of the first chapter, but the first chapter was recently excerpted in Judith magazine, um, and which I assume some of you may read, and it's very easily available. So I thought I would concentrate on another chapter. The book really mingles real life historical figures with fictional ones. So Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, some of the scientists do make appearances in the book. And in this excerpt that I'm going to read to you, there's also a potter that's mentioned by the name of Maria Martinez, who becomes a character in the book. And she was she was a potter of quite great, a Native American potter whose work is very well known and sells for, I don't know, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars today. So I'll read a chapter where what's happened is that Christine, who was a chemistry PhD student when she met her husband, who's also a chemist. She gave up her PhD to follow him to England when he got a fellowship. She changed her profession to art restoration using her chemistry background. They moved to New York. She started a restoration business, and her husband comes home and says to her, honey, we're moving somewhere out west. I don't know where, I don't know for how long. It has to do with the war. You'll do fine. And so they have arrived at Los Alamos a few weeks ago in the chapter that I'm going to read you, and they are on their way to a party at the Oppenheimers. Um, so without further ado, um, Christine hooked her arm around Thomas's as they strode to the Oppenheimers' home. She would have liked to stroll leisurely and take in the cool evening air, but Thomas was walking quickly, glancing at his watch, and she struggled in her high-heeled pumps to keep up with him. Are we late? She asked. Who cares? He sighed. These parties are always the same. Everyone pretending to get along. Too much alcohol. I already know I'll have a hangover tomorrow. Are you okay? She asked. You know I can't talk about things. Why are you pressing me? I'm not pressing you. I just want to know how you're feeling. It's not easy to joke around and make nice with people that I've been arguing with all week over who gets the limited material we need. The leaves rustled in the large trees as they made their way along Bathtub Row, so named because its stone and log houses, built when Los Alamos was still a boys' boarding school, were the only homes on the hill with the luxury of bathtubs. Christine patted his arm. Maybe the party will help smooth things over. At the house, they exchanged nods with the two military guards at the entrance and let themselves in through the open door. So glad you've come. Opie is Oppenheimer's nickname. Opie loped toward them, gangly and graceful as a giraffe. Let me take your jackets. You look lovely this evening, Opie said, his intense blue eyes taking in Christine's off-the-shoulder satin dress. Why, thank you, she smiled. There were so few occasions to get dolled up. It was nice to have her efforts appreciated. Can I get you drinks? One of my martinis, perhaps? Sure, Thomas said. Wouldn't miss one of your famous martinis for the world. Why don't you join the crowd singing with Owen? Opie gestured toward a young man playing a ukulele. He's with the special engineering detachment, seems to know all the latest hits, so I invited him to play for us this evening. They made their way over to the group, nodding and smiling at the many people they knew. Owen was crooning a song Christine immediately recognized as the Mills Brothers' latest hit, Paper Dolls. She leaned into Thomas and swayed to the music, wondering if her husband, like the crooner, wanted a paper doll instead of a real live girl. Once she had been sure he wanted a spirit independent wife. As Thomas and others joined Owen in the song's refrain, she hoped he still did. Opie brought over their drinks, a martini in each hand. Christine took a sip. Thomas was right about the free-flowing alcohol. The drink had an overly generous amount of gin. She looked around the room at the wood beams elegantly embedded in the high wood white plaster walls, the well-stocked bookshelves. Her eyes wandered to the chimney, its mantel decorated with a striking black vase. She stepped away from the group to take a closer look. Opie joined her. I see you appreciate beautiful things. She smiled at him. His fragile lankiness reminded her of the saints in medieval paintings. His penetrating eyes were like theirs, at once distant and comforting. I used to work as a restorer, paintings, furniture, porcelain, that sort of thing. Really? He sucked her in with his gaze. The last project I worked on before we left New York were pointillist paintings, Seurat, Le Bon, if you know them. I do. Le Mans and Signac's landscape have always struck me as fine. Personally, I prefer Signac over Seurat. Do you like pointillist art in particular? She had met Oppie at numerous parties, but their exchanges had been no more than perfunctory before. Now she found his erudition and affable curiosity and made talking to him surprisingly easy and pleasant. I'm fascinated by them. Actually, I wrote a long article for a catalog to a show in New York all about how pointillist deconstructed color to its most essential elements, influenced, of course, by advancements in science at the time, our understanding of atoms, the discovery of electrons, et cetera, et cetera. She ended with a laugh, afraid that she may have gone on too long. Never thought of pointillism that way. Very interesting. He seemed genuinely intrigued, ignoring the gleeful shrieks from across the room and the singing, which had grown louder. I'd love to see that catalog. Unfortunately, the article never made it in, arrived too late to be included, apparently delayed by the censors, and censored so much it was unreadable. Imagine an article about art. Opie combed her face with his eyes for a moment before answering. It can be hard to understand the censors, but sometimes they do make sense. His lips quivered as if he were trying to suppress a mischievous grin. She could tell that he had been a good professor, forcing students to think for themselves rather than immediately revealing what was to him an obvious answer. Then it struck her. You mean atoms, electrons? That's what bothered them? He didn't look at her and instead busied himself with taking down the vase from the mantel, deliberately inspecting it for a few moments. He held up the piece. I got this from Maria Martinez, a potter from San Ildefonso. I met her more than a decade ago when I lived here. It took Christine a moment to focus again on the pot. She was trying to absorb what Opie had said, actually not said, about her censored article. He was looking at her expectantly, obviously waiting for her to respond to the change in topic. You lived here? I was a sickly teenager. I always liked horseback riding. My parents sent me out here to recover from dysentery. The air here was good for me, and ever since I've come whenever I could just to ride and camp out. Christine tried to imagine the energetic man standing before her as sickly. When I was asked to find a remote place for our little project, naturally I looked here. In a way, everyone in this room is here because of my dysentery. Opie laughed, then continued wistfully. I guess part of me was hoping to relive that magical past. He took a generous sip of his martini and should take a small one of hers, unsure what to say. Just then, Kitty teetered up on her high heels. She was as petite as Opie was tall. She nodded a hello to Christine, her eyes sweeping her with suspicion before looking up at her husband and tossing her curly dark hair. I need your help getting Peter to sleep. She patted his arm possessively. Come now. 2-year-olds. Opie smiled ruefully at Christine. He handed her the vase before going off with his wife, who grabbed his arm, unsteady on her feet. Christine was glad to be left on her own to marvel at the vase with its fine design, part matte, part shiny. As she gazed at it, she heard Enrico Fermi, a few feet away, animatedly explaining recent events in his native Italy to a few colleagues. I always believed my countrymen would come to their senses and break with Hitler. They were really not fascists at heart. It's only a pity it took them so long, he said. But we hear it's terrible now with the Nazis taking over Rome. They just say Jews are being deported. It's most troubling, his wife Laura added. Christine listened to the assenting murmurs of the group around the Fermis as she inspected the vase. It struck her how many people at Los Alamos lived with bifocal vision, here and now, but simultaneously with another distant world in view where unspeakable things were happening. The Fermis, the Copels, and so many others had relatives and friends in Europe whose lives were in danger, their fates unknown. Feeling their anguish, Christine found the war made more sense to her now than it had before she'd come, and yet it all felt so remote. But this vase, that was immediate. She traced the animal-like design on the surface with a finger. Suddenly, something jabbed her waist. She jumped. The vase dropped. It shattered on the flagstone floor before the chimney. Owen singing and the guests accompanying him masked the sound of the crash. She looked down in horror, then turned to find Thomas beside her. "What have you done?" he said. "You startled me. Why did you poke me like that?" "I just came to see how you were doing." "I was doing just fine." She crouched down and started picking up the pieces. What would Opie say? Opie, now back in the living room, saw the shattered vase and approached them. I'm sorry." Christine held out the pieces of the vase in her hand. "Don't worry about it. It's just a pot." His wistful eyes belied a weak smile. It was an accident," Thomas said. "Of course," Opie said. "Maybe I can fix it." Christine rose and placed some pieces on the mantel. Opie stood, fingering the gathering shards. "Some things can't be fixed." That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So,
Oh,
um,
you have more? Go ahead. Sorry.
so that sort of helps to set the scene, and as it develops, Opie appears once in a while, not that often, and Christine is really in the search for herself in this, which um, as the novel progresses, and and the relationship between the characters develops. So I think that's for now enough for an introduction. I'll leave anything else for the chat.
Thank you, Galina. I was just thinking of that line you read, an article that never made it in. I'm sure all of us writers here on the call can definitely relate to that. Sending off pieces that never make it in. Uh,
Usually not because of a censor.
right, not because of a censor, or maybe who knows these days. Okay, I will now introduce our next author. Benjamin Resnick is the rabbi of the Pelham Jewish Center in New York, ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. He lives in Pelham with his family, and Next Stop is his first novel. So let me ask you to unmute and to it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you for Julie for arranging this. It's sort of a strange and some ways unsettling experience to be doing this on such a sort of momentous day in the history of our people in Israel. But thank you guys for coming on. And this is Next Stop, which is my first novel. As Julie said, it came out in September from Avid Reader Press, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster. And I'm actually just going to read a little bit from the inside flap to give you a sense of what it's about, and then read a short section, because the inside flap does a pretty good job. After a black hole consumes the state of Israel, similar strange events occur in major cities around the world, ushering in a time of chaos as well as miracles. It's not long before conspiracy theories take hold in various pockets of the globe. Are the Jews the victims, or are they the culprits? Against a backdrop of anti-Semitic paranoia, restrictions on Jewish life, and spasms of violence, Ethan and Ella, Jewish citizens of a nameless American city, meet and fall in love. And the story is about their developing relationship. Ethan begins the book as a tech writer of sorts, and Ella is a photojournalist. She's also a mother. She has a young son, Michael. And as the novel progresses, they form a sort of blended family and navigate an increasingly hostile and menacing atmosphere in the city where they live. And this section is from the beginning of the book when Ethan and Ella have just slept together for the first time, and they're sort of laying in bed, and Ella's reflecting a little bit on this first event when Israel is swallowed up by this black hole, which happened when she was about 16, and then she falls asleep and has a dream. So as they lay in bed, their bodies close together but not touching, Ella remembered the image of the first event as it flashed across the screen. The photographer who captured the image from an Israeli helicopter died that day when the blades of the helicopter sputtered and stalled, but not before she managed to send the image out, the first and last of its kind, and the photograph that made Ella want to be a photographer. The blinding absence in the center, the green of the palms and olive trees on the left side of the frame, the old man standing near the rim of the anomaly, never identified even as the photograph made its way around the world. We need to figure out what to do, her father said when they were all together that afternoon. His voice was measured, and his hands, she recalled, were perfectly motionless, his palms pressed into their dining room table. Miriam, we should buy gold. But her mother was not listening. She was pacing around the kitchen, looking down at her phone, refreshing news websites, dialing and redialing her brother Aaron, who lived in Haifa, her aunt and uncle, who lived in Modiin. Her movements took on a frenzied staccato quality, and Ella watched from the couch in the living room as her mother cycled through revolutions like a broken wind-up toy. Her breathing would become labored, and she would calm herself at intervals, closing her eyes and resting her weight against the refrigerator. Then her eyes would snap open again, shining with panic like the eyes of an animal cornered. Eventually, Ella's father went over to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind and held her as she sank down to the floor, where they stayed for quite some time. They were quiet. All was quiet. Then Ethan's hand, the edge of his little finger against hers, restored her to the present. And as she closed her eyes, he whispered something she did not quite hear. Ella dreamt of a man walking with a torch across a dark field. He was wearing a thick overcoat, a wool cap, a scarf like a gash, red and wild in the wind. Far in the distance, the lights of a small town. Far behind, a line of trees. And in between, nothing. In between, the man walking. She saw through his eyes. She was with the man and she was within the man, but she was not the man. She was far ahead, well beyond the lights. What did he know, she wondered, apart from the cold? What did he know, she wondered, apart from the walking? Somewhere the moon hidden by clouds, somewhere an owl hunting mice and rabbits. From high above, she saw the man walk 5,000 miles on air. It was the light of his torch and the gentle pressure of his feet that created the earth beneath him, the selfsame patch of ground that carried him on to lights and chimneys. And always the wolves, and always the bears, and always the Cossacks, and always the dogs. But his father said go, so he went, from Vilna to Shanghai, from Shanghai to Chicago, and from Chicago onward, to a place promised but unseen, to a woman named Zisa Butwinnik, one of Ella's four great-grandmothers, the only one whose name she knew. So I want to talk about a very happy event in my life, which is not the publication of this book in English, which is a happy event, um, but the fact that the book is forthcoming in Hebrew um, from Kibbutz HaMeuchad, which is HaKibbutz HaMeuchad, which is an Israeli publishing house. Um, and I say this in complete literal seriousness. For me, the Hebrew language edition is by far the more important edition. And I want to talk a little bit on that for the next few minutes. There is a pretty famous short story, or not novella really, by the great great, brilliant Cynthia Ozick called Envy or Yiddish in America. And it came out, I think, in 1968 or 1969. I think it was originally published in Commentary, and then it probably appeared in one of her many brilliant collections of stories. And it's about a Yiddish writer named Edelstein, who's living in America, I think in maybe the late 40s or early 1950s, and um, it's a complicated story. And what Cynthia Ozick is saying in the story about language and about translation is extremely complicated and multivalent. And she's been writing about this about language and about Jewish language and Jewish storytelling in a variety of ways for many different years, for many years. But what animates Edelstein, who is the main character and is sort of an unknown, published but pretty much unknown Yiddish poet, the main action and drama and trauma in the book turns around Edelstein's desperate desire to be published in English and to find a translator for his work so that people will read it, so that he can exist in for the ages and for humanity and not exist only as a ghost, right? Because in his imagination, Yiddish is a dead language, a murdered language. Um, and there's spoilers here, I suppose, for Envy or Yiddish in America, but he does not find a translator in the book, and it's a great personal tragedy for him that he does not. Um, and again, I think what Cynthia Ozick is saying in that story is very complicated, but for Edelstein, I actually have the opposite envy and anxiety. I'm very pleased that I'm being translated into Hebrew. Um, because for the same reason, and not to be too grandiose, but for the same reason that Rambam wrote in Hebrew, because Rambam wanted to write for the ages. And when he wrote for the age, when he meant the ages, he meant for the ages for the Jews. And I'm not sure what languages Jews will be speaking day to day in 500 or 1,000 years. But among the languages that Jews are going to be aware of in 500 or 1,000 years, Hebrew is going to be one of them. I can't prove it, but I believe it bemunah shlema, with perfect faith. Um, and so if you want, as a Jewish writer, and listen, I think it's very unlikely that anyone's going to be reading Next Stop in 500 years. But if they are reading it in 500 years, I think it's vastly, vastly more likely that they'll be reading it in Hebrew. Because the Jews then, and there will be Jews then, I also can't prove it, but I believe it with perfect faith, will have a strange text from one of the ancients, and they'll know how to read it because it will exist for them in Hebrew. Um, so I have a great deal of real and persistent anxiety about the fact that I write in English. Because one of my one of my main goals and preoccupations is telling Jewish stories. And language, culture, I believe, lives fundamentally in sign language. And so, how can it be that I tell Jewish stories, authentically Jewish stories, richly, deeply specific, ardently parochial, tribal Jewish stories in a non-Jewish language? And not only in a non-Jewish language, English, and this is sort of a deeper cut, and I'll say a little bit about what I mean about this. English is, I think, a Christian language. Why? Because it's a universal language. This I also can't prove, and this is really armchair sociology. But one of the reasons why I think Americans are so bad at learning other languages for the most part is that everyone speaks English to us, because everyone speaks English everywhere. And this is a Christian language because the whole idea of a universal culture is a Christian culture. This is where Paul makes his famous break with the ancient rabbis, and by the way, with Jesus, and says, "There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, all are one in Jesus Christ." And the whole idea that you're going to have a universal humanity rooted in a specific idea is a Pauline idea, and therefore a fundamentally anti-Jewish and I think anti-Semitic idea. So what does it mean when I, as a Jewish writer, I want to tell authentically Jewish stories, but I'm writing in a language and I'm thinking in a language, and I speak Hebrew, but I'm never going to write in Hebrew ever. I can never imagine doing that. Maybe in another Gilgul, but not in this lifetime. And so there's an act of translation, right? I'm trying to I'm trying to translate aspects of Jewish reality and Jewish culture into a language that is not indigenous to our people. And I think maybe insofar as it is a universal language, seeks to erase our people. I have real, very persistent anxiety about this. And I'll close by sharing sort of two things about this. One of the things about the book, the English version of the book, and I am proud of the book. I mean, I don't hate it just because it's English. I obviously love English on some level because I've been writing in it my whole life. Um, but one of the proudest things in the book, and I'm so pleased, and I almost can't believe that my um, editor allowed, had understood and let me keep this in. There's a line of untranslated Hebrew in the text, which reads "Kan gara mishpacha Yehudit smecha ben atachana kodemet letachana habaa," which translates to "Here lived a happy Jewish family between the last stop and the next stop." Which is one of two times, I believe, that the phrase "next stop" appears in the book. It appears in untranslated Hebrew text. Um, and it was very important to me that it remained untranslated and remain untransliterated. And it is in the text. And when people ask me about it, and I often get questions about it, they say, "Well, how do you expect people to respond to this?" And I say, "Well, I expect them to respond in one of three ways. The first way is if you read Hebrew for whatever you're Israeli or you know Hebrew or whatever, it's like a little hug. It's like a little insidery. It's an embrace. Um, if you have some Hebrew, like maybe you're an American Jew who like went to Hebrew school and you can kind of limp through it, or you have a little homework assignment, maybe. It might encourage you to work on your Hebrew a little bit. You go into Google, you put it in, you have a little assignment, and you might think to yourself, gosh, I should really work on my Hebrew, which you should. If that applies, you should. You must do that. The third option is someone who has no Hebrew whatsoever, and then they are put really, really outside. There's sort of an instant, I think, othering effect of seeing something in a language that you can't make heads or tails of. And all three of those, there may be more potential responses, but all three of those potential responses are something that I intend. Um, and to the last, speaking a moment to the last one about being outside the text, one thing that's really important to me, not just as a Jewish artist, but I think as an artist in general, is writing something that is really, really ardently, ardently specific, and rooted in a very, very specific culture, not rooted in universal humanity, but rooted in a specific way of being human that then radiates outward, and maybe speaks to things that we all share, or maybe not. There's another essay by Cynthia Ozick called "A Tour to New Yiddish," in which this is one of her central preoccupations, as it certainly is one of my central preoccupations. I don't know if it's central for her, but she wrote a lot about it. And in Towards the New Yiddish, she's also saying a lot in that essay about the importance of Jewish language. But one of her charges for Jewish writers at the end of that essay is, and she talks about the image of the shofar. And some of you have ever studied the halacha, you know that you can shape a shofar, but you're not allowed to make the narrow end the wide end and the wide end the narrow end. If you do that, it's not a kosher shofar. And at the end of that essay, she says, as Jewish writers, we need to blow into the narrow end. And if we blow into the narrow end, we will make a sound. And by blow into the narrow end, she means write things from an ardently specific Jewish perspective, by us, for us, about us, and directed towards us. And that's really what I've done with Next Stop. And I'll close by saying that Next Stop was written sort of long before October 7th, though it emerged, of course, into a world post October 7th and seems to have met that moment, which is a horrible moment, obviously, um, in a variety of different ways. And because it came out after October 7th, I think I've gotten the question a lot about what's the politics of the book, which I'm not sure I would have gotten beforehand. And I don't think the book has a politics, but if it does, um, I think the politics are that it's very important to read stories from very specific cultural perspectives, not just Jewish perspectives. And, I'm not breaking any new ground when I say we live in sort of siloed kind of echo chambers a lot of the time. And I think fiction as a form of media has a real comparative advantage in that it can invite people into a really intimate encounter with ways of seeing the world that are not their own. And I hope that's what I hope that's some of what Next Stop can accomplish. And I hope that's what literature can accomplish. And I think that's why literature is so important. So one of the reasons.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you. That was great. Fascinating.
My pleasure.
Okay, I will introduce our third author. Judy Gruen is an award-winning columnist for the Jewish Journal and the author of 5 books, including the memoirs Bylines and Blessings and The Skeptic and the Rabbi. In 2024, she won first place in commentary in the American Jewish Press Association's Rock Hour Awards and second place for book reviews in the Los Angeles Press Club's Southern California Journalism Awards. Her work has also appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, Boston Globe, Los Angeles Times, New York Daily News, Christian Science Monitor, Aish.com, Jewish Action, and other media outlets. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband, Jeff, and Judy, sending hugs to you and the whole community, everyone in Los Angeles. If you want to say anything about that, we'll, we can speak about that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Julie, for all the work that you do to host these terrific author events. And I'm really happy to be here. And I've really enjoyed Galina's and Benjamin's presentations. Benjamin, one of the last things that you mentioned about the shofar and blowing into the narrow and really resonates with me. My book, Bylines and Blessings, is my second memoir, and it really it poses the question: what happens when career ambition starts to bump up or clash, actually, with cherished personal and religious values? And I didn't intend to throw another memoir out there into the vast pile of memoirs. We're all kind of drowning in memoirs. So it was not a decision I took lightly to write this book and to publish this book. My previous memoir, The Skeptic and the Rabbi, also was something I thought long and hard about. It was a protest novel because I am a balas tshuva. I don't really like that term, but I chose deeper Jewish engagement in my 20s. It was the hardest decision of my life, and I had become very, very deeply pained by the spate of anti-Orthodox memoirs that had been starting to appear around 2012. There were a lot of them, and they had their right to tell their stories, but there was nothing counterbalancing them, nothing. And the secular publishing world, which is all very, very secular oriented, wasn't interested to hear any kind of other side. So that's why I did Skeptic and the Rabbi. I thought I did my memoir, I'm done. But, as writers, we can't help it. We keep getting new ideas. And a few years ago, I realized that I had a lot of stories that I had never shared about the early years of my writing career. Not that I have such a stellar or fascinating career, but the stories that I wanted to tell, they started out just because they were fun for me to write. It was an indulgence down memory lane. But as I did this blog series, which I called Chasing the Byline, I realized that there was a lot more to these stories than just entertainment value. I do a lot of humor writing, and that's very important to me. And even in serious pieces, whenever it's appropriate, I put in as much humor as I can because I don't believe that humor is a luxury. I believe it's a life tool. And I realized that the stories that I was telling here, from being an overconfident, supposed hotshot writer, I learned very differently, very, very quickly, that I had a lot to learn, to overcoming obstacles, to to being passionate, deeply, deeply passionate and ambitious about developing my craft, that these were transferable stories, that you didn't have to be a writer to be able to enjoy stories like this, to relate to stories like this. So yes, it became a book. I hope you'll forgive me for that. These stories that I tell, they're all from my life and career, and they span about 40 years. So what's nice about that is that, you really see an arc of my personal history, that I also talk very tough talk about what goes on in the publishing industry. It's secular militancy, where I take on the Authors Guild in one of the later chapters and really call them out on things that I think that they are claiming are actual lies. Um, Really, these are lessons about persistence, overcoming obstacles, and more as the stories go on, it's about my decision to give up on my original goal of trying to make it maybe not big, but at least medium big in the world of secular journalism, because I found that it was just so unsatisfying. And plus, the walls were getting higher and higher. And to focus, as Benjamin had said regarding the shofar, into that narrow space. And that allowed me to redefine success as having impact more than perhaps having, X number of followers or X number of book sales. The things that I love to write about, various aspects of life through a Jewish lens. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of this book. This book was published last February by Kohler Books, and while it was in production, October 7th happened, so I needed to make a last minute change to the author's introduction, and I thought, well, who's going to care about a book like this in light of what's going on in Gaza and the hostages? And I thought nobody's going to care. But I realized that there is something about this book that is very Jewishly affirming. It's positive. There is humor, and we need that even in dark times. I've been very, very happy with the response to the book. I'm very happy that I'm hearing from young people, young mothers who are building their own careers and telling me that they can really relate to when I write about my own conflict about professional ambition versus motherhood. And so I feel that even now, there's added relevance to the book beyond what I might have hoped for. I'd like to read you a short excerpt from a chapter that's called My 15 Minutes of Writing About Fame. It's an excerpt from an excerpt, so if there's a missing transition here or there, it's not because I wrote it without the transition, it's because I need to be mindful of everybody's time. And this chapter is about a time when I had an opportunity to be a temporary editor at a Hollywood publication, going into the office. And that was really fun for me. And I was busy writing an obituary of Gene Kelly, who had just died, and I was really enjoying it. I always, by the way, liked writing obituaries when I had the opportunity. It's really just doing a personality profile for somebody who can't still answer any more questions. But you learn about people and you learn to appreciate them. So I was so busy and engrossed in my work, looking out from my 7th floor office in beautiful downtown, that I forgot to pick up my kids from carpool. And I got a call. That's how the chapter opens. And so I'm going to move on a few paragraphs. Working at this magazine had been a temporary gig, but I became possessive of the role mighty fast. I'd been freelancing for 8 years, satisfied to juggle motherhood and work. I couldn't have done it without full-time household help, and I couldn't have afforded that without my husband's hard work and success in running a small digital graphics and signage industry business. Many of my friends had jobs that didn't translate well to part-time or freelance work, and I considered myself fortunate. That afternoon, when I forgot about my kids, I was jolted into realizing how much of my sense of self and even my sense of self-worth was bonded to my writing. That's why I could so easily become engrossed in my work, even forgetting I had children, while I joyously ruminated over word choices. Should it be dismayed or distraught? How about perturbed? Would discompose sound too Victorian? Time really flies when luxuriating over 1,300 plus pages of a Roget's thesaurus. When one of my sons had first heard me mention the name of this beloved writing accessory, he asked, "Isn't that a kind of a dinosaur?" My tenure as a magazine department editor was fleeting, even briefer than some Hollywood marriages we wrote about. I was in the groove, enjoying the interviewing, writing, and editing until one morning I arrived at work to learn that my services were no longer required. A woman a few years younger than me sashayed into the office that I now understood was no longer mine. She was dressed as if she had tracked down the exact outfit worn on the cover of the January issue of Creepster magazine. She looked at me as if I were a lost tourist and asked, "Can I help you?" "This is my office," I said with faux conviction. "Oh, didn't Sonia tell you? I'm the new editor." She stood facing me with a hard look. I noticed that her hair was a shade of black that did not exist in the natural world. Before she had poured her first cup of coffee on the job, she had become even more territorial than I had. Was this a female thing, I wondered? My education in Jewish values had taught me so much wisdom. This included giving other people the benefit of the doubt, greeting others with a smile, and treating others as you would want them to treat you. But at that moment, I just despised this woman, who was not much more than a kid, for her arrogance, her appalling lack of grace, her ghoulish black nail polish. Was that supposed to be attractive? Or a warning, like the skull and crossbones image on containers, warning of poison inside? "Well, this job must have been a real feather in your cap," she said condescendingly, as I felt a rising fury. I balled my hands into tight fists and worked my jaw hard to keep it from dropping to the floor. I didn't need my Roget's thesaurus to summon a whole slew of salty words I wanted to spew at this interloper. Who did she think she was? Why did she think I was playing dress-up editor? And then it hit me. I considered the outfit I was wearing that day and what it must have telegraphed to her. She was dressed for bar hopping on Melrose Avenue, and I was dressed like I was running a subscription drive for the Saturday Evening Post. And my shoes, oh, why had I worn those shoes today? Screamed, "Arch support." But why did I score no points for my chic beret? I often splurged on designer chapeau to make the mitzvah of covering my hair easier. I know these hats flattered me and did me proud, but as these thoughts ran amok in my head, I began to feel something tickling my leg. Swiftly glancing down, I saw that the hem of my skirt was now coming undone. So much for a seamless re-entry into the office work world. My skirt was unraveling faster than I was. "Actually, I have many years of publication management and in journalism," I parried. "Please don't notice my falling hem," I prayed. "I'm going to find Sonia," I said, turning on my sensible low heel and away from this insufferable upstart. But first, I stopped at the secretary's desk where I whispered a request for Scotch tape. Seeing my mortified expression, she handed it to me with a sympathetic nod. In the ladies' room, I taped the hem on my drab plaid skirt, which I would hurl into the Goodwill bag the minute I got home. I found Sonia and informed her that my replacement had landed. Oh no, Judy, I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell you. Please forgive me. You know, it's award season and it's so crazy around here. Everybody's having nervous breakdowns. I assured her it was all right, but I was thinking, good luck. If you need another fill-in when this civility challenged chick implodes, you've got my number. In the parking lot, I headed toward my money pit of an old minivan just as I saw Jack Lemmon exiting his gray Rolls Royce. He was parked in the row reserved for cars that screamed, I'm obscenely rich. My temporary job had ended with a crash landing, but I was still grateful to Sonia for the opportunity. Before Mean Girl editor arrived, I had fun dipping my toe into Tinseltown while also seeing that it would have never been a job that could have satisfied me on a long-term basis. My writing center of gravity lay outside that world, and I return to it now, thinking of ideas while waiting in the carpool lane. So this this gives you a real flavor for the book, the tone and the lightness of the stories, while also delivering what I hope are satisfying and thought-provoking ideas about how we think about work and work-life balance, and that struggle between ambition and what we consider to be success, and where does our center of success gravity lie. Ultimately, all the experiences that I share here are building up to what I hope is a meaningful message about the way at least one person, me, chose and struggled, very much struggled to find that balance between building a successful life, needing to redefine success, and not sacrificing my Jewish values. On my website, there is a reader's guide and an excerpt and lots of links to other interviews. Um, thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Okay, I am going to add back all of our authors to the spotlight while you are all thinking of your questions. So, okay, well, in the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, I'll just pick up on something that Judy said and asked to all of you, which is you talked about persistence and overcoming obstacles. So, what is, say, a lesson that you learned about persistence and overcoming obstacles in the course of your writing? And that's for all three of you. So, who wants to start?
I'm happy to start.
Go ahead, Galina. Yeah.
The novel took me 12 years to write. I was very busy doing other things. So it was something that I did mostly on weekends until I retired a few years ago. It's sort of, I had joined the uh, Bar-Ilan University's English Jewish writing program, and I joined and I had the intention of writing this novel. That was around 2009, and and then I was about to, I joined the program, and I had said in my interview that I was writing a novel, and then the first class they told us that we could only submit short stories to be workshopped. So I almost left the program. So then I basically started exploring the characters through short stories, and the book really started as 5 short stories. Um, and I think the other thing that is really important, the obstacles are naysayers, people who tell you you'll never publish it because you're too old to publish, people who told me that they got one person who shall not be named who said to me, I get reading fatigue from reading your writing, which is kind of a shocking thing to hear from somebody who's supposed to be critiquing my work. And so I'm of the sort of don't get mad, get even school of thought. So basically, that spurred me on. It was like, we'll see how this works out. And so I think that there's a lot of that. And I think just the persistence of getting between the difference between writing short stories and writing a novel is just huge. The structuring of it, the pacing of it, all the stuff. Like in a short story, you kind of, you get to the point really fast. And then here you find that, like, okay, so I loved describing the desert around Los Alamos. That was really fun. But then what about the kitchen of somebody's house? Like, how do you make that interesting? Like in a short story, you wouldn't have to bother, right? And
Mhm.
so this was it was a really different, like, because you have to have an evenness about the writing. You can't just have these huge descriptions about a desert and then nothing about what the houses look like. So this constant kind of balancing and keeping it um, so that it doesn't feel like you're reading five different books. And I think those are really, really big challenges.
Okay. Anything about persistence and overcoming obstacles?
Well, I wanted to be a writer since I knew what a writer was when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my first book didn't come out till I was 40. So, and I was working pretty consistently on it. I mean, I do other things too, but I've been working on it more or less since I was quite young. So it took a lot, and this is my first book that you can hold in your hand, but it is far from the first book that I've written. So yeah, you got to stick with it, I guess. If it's
Okay.
I'd like to add one thing that I really didn't mention, which is really the role that editors played and critique groups, including the one that we were in together. But that has been like really sustaining to be in a good writers group. That was hugely important to the persistence. And I also, I really benefited from phenomenal editorial support, both from my agent, which is Deborah Harris and Jessica, who, various people in her agency that read the book, including her, and also from the publisher. They really were just phenomenal. So I think it's worth that's a huge benefit if
Yeah.
you get that. So
Galina and I share an agent. So
yeah.
Nice.
uh, anyway,
Very
phenomenal.
cool.
Hi, Jessica.
Judy, what
Definitely.
about you? Something about persistence and overcoming
Well,
obstacles.
yes, one of the very first chapters in Bylines and Blessings is focuses on when I had a journalism internship in New York. I was 20, and I don't know what, again, I was ridiculously overconfident, and I was thrilled to get the internship because they only picked one person each summer. It was with the Jewish Student Press Service, which I'm sure I know does not exist anymore, but it was so valuable to me. And when I turned in my first story and my editor sat me down to review his edits, it was bleeding red, red circles, red circles, red circles. And he saw the look on my face. And he said, "Look, Judy, if you want to be a professional, you can never be jealous of your own words." And he said that to me well over 40 years ago. I never forgot it. And those words have stuck with me. And it taught me never be satisfied, always listen to somebody who has more experience and a different, better perspective than you. And even though I know that my writing is, I'm going to say, very high quality, I am always trying to improve it. And when it's funny, sometimes I go back to things that I wrote only a few years ago when it was already good, but I look at it again, I think I could have done better. One of the things I love about writing is you're never done. You never really arrive. There's always movement if when you have the passion for it, and that's something that I love.
That actually leads me to the best writing advice I ever got from anyone. From Michelle Bronfman, who just wrote Swimming with Ghosts, was that always keep honing your craft. Like you can, you know, keep taking more courses and just keep working at your craft. And I'll just say something about persistence and overcoming obstacles. And that is, I am mostly a short story writer. Now I'm trying to move into a novel right that I'm working on. But so yeah, like I send out a lot of stories to literary magazines, hoping that they'll take them. And a lot of them, some of my favorite stories, I submitted to over 100 journals. Yeah. And now the same thing when I'm looking for an agent for my new book, which is someone I just read over the weekend, like, yeah, you should expect to query like at least 100 agents. So, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but yeah, I think as a writer, perseverance has to be your middle name, whatever kind of writing you're doing.
I would like to sort of reinforce what Judy said. I started my agency career started with AP, and for the first 6 months, nothing I wrote got on the wire. Like all came back with exactly the kind of red marks that you're talking about. And I used to go home crying. I mean, I would go home, I'd get into bed, and I'd cry. And it really and then eventually and then there got to be fewer red marks, and then I remember very clearly the time when my first story actually went out, and like it hadn't been all marked up, and it was like so exciting. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, I have to say that in a writing group you also see people improve. Like it on the one hand you need the persistence, but on the other hand it really is it is craft, and you do have to keep at it.
I'll give a little nod also to my 10th grade English teacher, Mr. Lipman in Trumbull High School. He would give us assignments and we would get them back completely marked up, no grade. And we have to hand in a revision. And then the same thing would go back for like 3 or 4 times. We wouldn't get a grade until we revised and revised and revised. And that was such a valuable lesson. And at the beginning of the year, my mom is on the phone here. She can ascertain that I hate this teacher. And of course, by the end of the year, he was my favorite teacher, and actually was honored to have him at my own book launch, 5 years ago. So, yeah. Okay, let me see if there's other questions in the chat. I think people were answering the questions as they came in. So let me ask you all another question, which was, what was the most fun you had in writing of your books? Why don't we start? We'll go in reverse order now. Judy, why don't you go first?
The most fun in terms of writing the book?
Yeah. Like what was, or something surprising as you were writing, or something fun. I don't know.
I just had so much fun writing these stories when it was still the blog series. I think I mentioned that it began as a blog series called Chasing the Byline, and that was my purpose, just writing for me. I don't remember which famous author said it. It was a famous author who said, write the book that you'd like to read. Well, that's a pretty big investment for a readership of one, right? But I just had so much fun writing down these stories. And one of my favorite stories in here is about the time that I got an interview with Clarence Clemens, the sax player for Bruce Springsteen. He passed away many years ago. I had zero qualifications to get this story, zero. It was a way that I was trying to prove myself to an ex-boyfriend who had dumped me and who had taken me to a concert of Clarence Clemens. He had his own band, Red Bank Rockers. And just retelling that story, which was so filled with a kind of chutzpah I could not believe I had. I just enjoyed it. That was indulging the memory lane. But as I said earlier, as I went through all these stories where I was able to revisit a lot of the chutzpahdik things I did, I realized that there were larger lessons here to share.
We did that's a great chapter in your book, Judy. And yeah. So,
for me, the most fun part was definitely the editorial process. I like editing. I first with my agent, Jessica Casimir Jacobs, who's at the Deborah Harris Agency, and she's amazing. And then with my editor, Lauren Ween, at Avid Reader, I I think I enjoy that process for two reasons. One, you see the book getting concretely better. Like it's sort of very, very appreciable to me. And both Jessica and Lauren sort of improved the book, you know, so much. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to work with both of them on the book. And and I like making cuts. I really like it. Shorter for me is usually better. And you could just, and having someone having someone read the book really deeply and help me see, how it needs to be made better was just a gratifying and exciting process. And also, as a novelist who hadn't, who was trying to publish a novel for many, many, many years, it was just a pleasure to finally be doing it in a way where there's not that there's not hope. I mean, there's always hope because that, you keep doing it, but it was nice to do it in a way where I didn't have like the added layer of gosh, maybe the only people who are ever going to read this are me and my wife or whatever. And that, you know, uh, um, so that was really fun. That was the most fun I think that I had writing the book. And also I've just been so lucky that I've had such, productive, wonderful relationships with my agent and my editor. And, so yeah.
So, because it's a historical novel, part of the real fun was doing the research, and I basically had to stop myself because it's like you can get so into it, like finding the songs that are playing on the radio and the thing, listening to a lot of oral histories from the time. There's a lot of archival material, so that was really fun. I loved that. Um, but I think that the most fun I had was writing. I have one character there who's 23-year-old guy. Trying to write sex scenes from his point of view, that was the most fun. Like just try to imagine the other sex, and what it's like, what it feels like for them and what they're feeling and stuff. That was it was both a big challenge and to do it in a way that's sensitive and not too much and not too little, but try to get into the head of this guy. That I think was the biggest challenge, but it was also the most fun because I get more fun out of, I try to write about characters who are not like me as much as possible. And so he was as much not like me as I could get. So he's a 23-year-old from a New England family, not Jewish, working class. It was like the whole thing. It was just really fun to do that.
Love that. I also, yeah, try to write not about me. That's how my whole book started, actually. Okay, there's a question for Ben in the chat. There's so much left unexplained in the magical realism in your book. Can you talk about those choices?
Yeah. So it sounds like there's two questions there. One about sort of some of the magical or speculative kind of aspects of the book, and also sort of the fact that the end of the book doesn't totally, I mean, it's not so much of a spoiler, but there's a lot that's sort of ambiguous at the end. Um, I think that um, one of the things, so there's a there's a there's a important Austrian Jewish philologist in the middle of the 20th century named Erich Auerbach, who wrote a book called Mimesis. Um, I forgot what I forgot what the subheading is, describing reality in Western literature or something like that. And in that book, which is long and I think wonderful. There's one of his central claims that he develops in a variety of different ways is that there's two modes of Western storytelling. Um, there's what he calls Greek storytelling, and his example of that is the Odyssey, and there's Jewish storytelling, and his example of that is the Tanakh. And he, in a pretty famous opening chapter called Odysseus's Scar, he contrasts Odysseus coming home from his long journey with the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac, and both sort of magnificent sort of world historical stories. In the case of Odysseus, one of the things that he identifies is that um, the Odyssey and that episode is sort of a paragon of clarity. We know all of the history of the backstories, and we know what the various characters are thinking, and everything is kind of illuminated. If you imagine kind of like a sort of a brilliantly illuminated canvas with all of these kinds of details. the Akedah, on the other hand, which is unquestionably, one of the great stories that humans have ever told, unfolds over, I don't know, 20 verses or something like that, 20 psukim. And it's characterized by these vast, mysterious lacunae, and we don't know what the characters are thinking. And for that reason, Auerbach argues, the Tanakh demands interpretation, and demands to be read as Jews read it, which is that as generative, right? It generates interpretation, which is ultimately the process of midrash in Jewish storytelling. So I think there's something. I mean, I don't want the book to be cryptic. And I've had readers who think it is somewhat cryptic, and I take that, I understand that perspective and that criticism. But I think that there's something. I think there's something Jewish, if you think about storytelling as a Jewish activity or the nature of Jewish storytelling. I think that there's something about a story offers itself to the imagination of the reader in a way that hopefully is generative and produces kind of new stories. And I think that when you just, tie everything up in a very neat bow, it can sometimes hinder the extent to which readers can kind of imagine new possibilities based on the things you don't say in the text. And so yeah, that's kind of how I would answer that.
Love that answer because I never thought of it in that way, but some of my favorite books are the ones that, that keep me up at night thinking and they're generative, but I never considered it, never thought of it as generative before, but that's
And so
great.
it's mimesis is the representation of reality
Mm.
in Western literature by Eric Auerbach, which is a really, if you're into philology, if you're into that kind of stuff, it's highly recommended. So I think that's another interesting question. I mean, I don't know if the other writers want to comment or whatever, or there might be other questions in the comment, but the one question that I think about a lot is what is Jewish storytelling? And obviously, if you write about Jews, it's Jewish maybe, but is there a way of telling stories, a style of discourse or a style of narrative that is identifiably Jewish, regardless of what you're actually writing about? I think that's a very interesting question. And for Auerbach, his answer is sort of yes, I think there is, or at least there was, or something like that. So, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's if you think about how long there has been Jewish storytelling, um, and you look at I'm not sure that I see the relationship, say, between the Tanakh and Joseph Heller. Like it's like so it's like so broad, and you can't really say, well, or I don't know, maybe he's not considered Jewish enough. But I mean, you could take any number of I mean, I think that maybe there are more different, like there's certain strands of Jewish storytelling that some of it is more like the Hasidic storytelling and the what you're talking about, which is what you described as generative, which I think is a very useful term. And but I think it's to sort of take 2,000 years of literature and try and say that it's only one thing that's essential to all of them. I think that's really well, good luck finding something that really draws them together. I do think that what has characterized some of Jewish literature is who's the narrator of the displacement. I mean, I think the way that Philip Roth wrote, where he had sort of several levels of who's talking and who's telling you the story, that it's not necessarily direct. I think that has been true of some Jewish writers, maybe more than other ethnic groups. That to me maybe is something that I've seen in a lot of Jewish writing. But again, I would find it really hard to say that there's one thing that is like really, you know, characterizes Jewish writing. And also, some of it is prescriptive and, trying to make us better people, but not always. I don't know whether, Isaac Bashevis Singer, was he trying to make us a better people? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it could, so I don't know. I think it's a big order to fill to say that there is something distinctly Jewish that is one thing. There may be a number of things that are characteristic of different periods and different countries in terms of Jewish writing.
Thank you. All right, we're just about out of time, so there's two last things I want to do. One is to tell you that to save the dates or already register for our upcoming events, and we have several of our authors on the line. Our February event is coming up on February 16th with Azeva Bukai, Lihi Lapid, and Ruth Franklin. And our March event, which will be in person and on Zoom, will be on March 23rd with Avner Landis, Ayel Tabari, and Joe McGant. So those of you who are in reasonable driving distance of Modiin, I hope to see you in person that day. And everybody else who isn't, we'll see you on Zoom. And lastly, I want to share my screen and read this Mishberach for the Chatufim. It's not the typical one that you see, at least in my shul, but it's one that I found that I liked. So with all the good and happy news of today of welcoming back the three hostages, Romy, Emily, and Doron, we hope that this will continue very soon. Mishaberach Abotenu v'Imotenu Abraham v'Sara Yitzchak v'Rivka Yaakov Leah v'Rachel ואת לוחמנו יהושע דוד ויהודה דבורה יעל ויהודית הוא יברך את שבויי ונעדרי צה"ל והאזרחים והאזרחיות החטופים והחטופות הנתונים והנתונות בשביה ובצרה יהי רצון מפניך אדוני צבאות שתפדה נפשם משבי ותחזירם במהרה לארצם ומשפחתם ולביתם בריאים ושלמים בגופם ובנפשם ותיתן תבונה בלב העמלים לשחרורם ותיתן רחמים בלב שוביהם ויקוים בהם הכתוב כל ברמה נשמע נהי יחי תמורים רחל מבכה על בניה מענה להנחם על בניה כי איננו כה אמר אדוני מנעי קולך מבכי ועינייך מדמעה כי יש שכר לפעולתך נאום אדוני ושבו מארץ אויב ויש תקווה לאחריתך נאום אדוני ושבו בנים Uvanot Legulam, and that's from Sefer Yirmiyahu, Lamed Aleph. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, big thank you to Benjamin, Judy, and Galina for sharing your words and your inspiring stories and your persistence being writers. And thanks, everyone. And B'sorot Tovot, Shavua Tov.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.